Welcome to the Sweet and Condensed Podcast, a podcast by people who love movies, people, and the magic that lives where they meet.
Patrick, dude, it's been a while, man. I'm so excited that we got to chat. What was it? We caught up a couple weeks ago, and we both mentioned Disclosure Day and how we had it on our plans to watch it. For Sweet and Condensed in our newsletter, shameless plug, but also you were mentioning you're going to go catch up with a friend and watch it. So I'm just excited to, fully break down. We're going to spoil the whole movie, but before we get into that, what's new, dude? What's been going on in your world?
There's been a lot of things happening. It was awesome to reconnect with you a few weeks back. I'm glad we could put this together. I appreciated your text the other night. You're like, did you actually go see it? And I actually could report, yes, I had seen it. So it's some things I've been up to since I was last on ye old Sweet and Condensed is I did finally release, with a lot of help from you, a series of podcasts on my Substack, Worlds Beyond Worlds, looking at autonomy in the college classroom, kind of based on this course that you took, that we did together about a year ago on race, religion, and sci-fi. And then the podcast series kind of really focused on the idea of autonomy in education, but kind of focused on what I know best, which is the college or university classroom. So I'm also planning to develop a standalone online course for mostly targeted at faculty, but really open to anyone who wants to work through like what it can look like in the college classroom to give students way more like freedom and choice and independence, and how there's some great things and there's some challenging things, but I think overall I would vote yes. Also, since I mentioned my Substack, I'm preparing a new series of essays called Terraforming the Earth, which is going to look more at climate change and looking at how humans over time have already developed a wide array of techniques for working with their environment, getting away from this model of having like dominion over the earth and sort of subjugating the land and the creatures to our needs, but instead kind of really embracing the land as it is and realizing that we as humans actually do better when we are not the center of the literal universe. So I'm excited about that. It's in development and I'm, wanting to have it kind of planned out as opposed to publishing one thing and then 6 months go by. I'd like to have a concrete series together. And then, I've pivoted a little bit more towards teaching for the general public. Away from teaching on the university sort of campus environment. So there's a group called the Religion Department, and they are affiliated with the really successful YouTube channel Religion for Breakfast. And the Religion Department is a place where, if you're a member of the general public, you have access to a lot of the same types of courses that we offer in religious studies departments on college campuses. So I'm going to be teaching a course on Rumi's Masnavi. Jalaluddin Rumi was a jurist and Sufi or Muslim mystic who lived in Turkey. He was born in Afghanistan during the 13th century and then moved to Turkey, where he became a treasured mystical teacher. The Masnavi is his most famous work. Rumi is actually the best-selling poet in America.
Oh, wow.
And so we'll talk a lot about how this guy who wrote primarily in Persian centuries and centuries ago, and who was Muslim, became the best-selling poet in America in the late 20th and early 21st, sort of century, and how a lot of people who are big fans of his in the US in particular aren't even really that aware of how very Muslim he is.
Yeah.
So there's a lot there to look at. You can go to religiondepartment.com and find out more. The course runs kind of from August into September. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff taking place through the religion department. There's a course happening right now on Islam and hip hop.
Oh, that's cool.
My friend Brooke has a book coming out right now called A God-Shaped Nation, which is about religion in America. So she's doing kind of a book club, a guided reading course to go along with that. There's a ton of stuff on there, and it's really been fun to switch gears and get to do all the stuff I love about teaching and kind of put aside some of the stuff that I didn't enjoy very much.
Right.
So yeah, so that's what I am up to.
That's cool. No, that makes so much sense because I'm not well read in poetry, but every time you've mentioned Rumi, I'm like, why do I know that? Why does that sound familiar? Why does that? And so I didn't know that it was the best-selling, or he's the best-selling poet in the States. And so it's so funny to be like, oh, I'm familiar, even though I don't think I've read a poem, but who knows? Maybe I have read, but yeah, I'm least read in poetry, it seems. So that's pretty cool. And then also I wanted to mention about your autonomous learning structure. I'm going to a professional development conference this upcoming Sunday through Thursday. And one of the pre-assignments was to upload a syllabus from a class you really enjoyed. And then we're going to discuss it. So I was like, oh, this is such a cool opportunity. Because one, the science fiction, race, and religion course was a blast because I just, like we've mentioned multiple times before on podcasts, is we just basically hung out and nerded out, and I got to read, the Arrival short story, watch the Arrival movie, watch Jurassic Park, read the Jurassic Park, Frankenstein, Lord of the Rings. And so I was like, obviously I'm going to choose this one that has a lot to do with movies and film and books. But also I thought it would be a cool way to expose or have discussion with other folks, because it's specifically for Latin people. And so it's all over the spectrum. And so I would get to, they're supporting us in PhDs. It's the HTI is a really cool program. I think their percentage of the people that are HTI scholars are within their community. It's like 90+% of them finish the PhD. So they're like huge in trying to get brown folks to complete PhDs and get access to all the stuff. But nonetheless, I'm like, I wonder if anyone is doing this, like uploading a syllabus that's autonomous learning. So I'm excited to expose people to other ways of structuring and engaging in the classroom, and then even getting to dialogue with all the professors who are part of HDI that are leading the courses. So I'm very excited for that discussion. But anyways, just a side tangent there for you. And I'm also excited. Awesome. It's in Princeton, and I've never been there.
Okay.
So I'm very.
And what does, for those who aren't familiar, myself included, what does HTI stand for? Hispanic
Theological Initiative. And It's not just for theological scholars, it's also religion. So they support anyone who's studying theological and religion fields. So there's a lot of folks who are doing traditional, like more, like what you think about when you think about PhDs in religion and theology. And then there's folks like myself and my friend Kim I'm doing cinema and orientation, and Kim's doing mushrooms and indigeneity and their use of psychedelics. So like, there's some people who are standouts in terms of untraditional studies. So it's a pretty wide spectrum too, in terms of institutions that are involved, which I really appreciate. They're just really focused on helping the scholar more so than being picky about, oh, well, you're from this institution or that institution, or you're part of, certain spectrums of whatever it is that people are studying. So, but yeah, that's what that is. Yeah, there's so many acronyms, and I forget that, you just start riddling them off, that I'm like, oh yeah, I should probably explain some of this.
No worries. Well, I'll be excited to hear how that conference goes for you. That's a great opportunity for you and Kim. And number one, I hope it goes well. But number two, you'll have to report back on what people think about absolutely. This more kind of this idea of student autonomy. And I feel confident that you will encounter people who are already doing it in the classroom, and there is no limit to the shapes that it can take. And that'll maybe be some good people that I could interview for part of as part of the course that I'm doing.
Oh, absolutely.
So we'll stay in touch.
Absolutely. Well, with that said, how about we just dive right into this movie, Disclosure Day, Spielberg's latest and maybe not so greatest. The internet seems to have so many opinions in the discourse. I've been enjoying it. It's like people really love it, and people really, I wouldn't say hate necessarily, but they have a lot of thoughts on it. So it's been fun reading that, but I'm excited to just chat. So again, we are going to talk about Disclosure Day. It's out in theaters, but we are still going to spoil everything. So if you haven't seen it yet, go watch it. Then you can come back. Or if you're like, I don't really want to watch it, or I want to be sold on watching it, here we go. Let's just dive into this conversation. So Alrighty, so the letterbox description says a Kansas City meteorologist and a young whistleblower uncover undeniable proof of extraterrestrial contact, forcing them to choose between revealing a truth that can unite the world or keeping it hidden forever. And again, it's directed by Steven Spielberg. It's written by David Cope, who's a longtime collaborator since Jurassic Park with Steven Spielberg. And the cast is Emily Blunt, Josh O'Connor, Colin Firth, Eve Hewson, and Coleman Domingo. And another longtime collaborator, which I was stoked about, was John Williams as a composer. And then cinematographer, I'm so sorry, Janusz Kaminski. Hopefully I pronounced that somewhat relatively correct. But before we actually get really into Disclosure Day, I just had to ask, because Spielberg has been around obviously for decades. I think he's a master of the craft. I think he really understands storytelling in such a way. And he was such a young director in Hollywood when he first started releasing things. I think he was like 26 maybe when he did Jaws, it's been really cool to see his arc of filmmaking. So I just wanted to ask, like, what is your personal history with Steven Spielberg movies?
Well, like many people, I've seen a lot of Spielberg movies. I think the biggest one that jumps out to me is Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh, cool.
And, because I remember when it came out and like it was kind of too much for me to see. And even like at the end where everyone's faces are being melted by the sort of, spirit that comes out of the Ark of the Covenant, I was like, oh, this is a little intense. But obviously he's, through the Indiana Jones movies especially, those are probably the ones I remember the most from growing up. I somehow didn't see E.T.
No.
And I don't really know. Like, I remember watching it in my 30s and I was like, oh, well, that's pretty cool.
Right.
And there were definitely some like visual cues that were similar between E.T. and Disclosure Day in terms of how he envisioned, extraterrestrials or, aliens. But yeah, I mean, obviously he's one of the most well-known, successful, accomplished directors of, my entire lifetime. He's been making movies. And I think that's part of the reason that we're seeing the critique online is that the bar for a Spielberg movie, especially like a summer blockbuster type, the bar is really high. Whereas, like, Josh, if you had been the director on this film, people would have been like, oh, what is this guy going to do next?
That's true. I didn't even think about that.
Right? But when Spielberg, then the expectations are super high. And that's, I think, part of where it's a difficult thing. It's when you're at the peak for so long, how do you continue? So if he had made this, 30 years ago, people would have been like, oh my gosh, there's some great ideas here. That's what I think. But because it's today and because we're all sort of waiting for this sort of transcendent experience, and then some of us aren't getting that, and some people are, but some of us aren't, like I didn't, then it's a little bit of a bummer. So like going into it, I was expecting sort of like a B+ on the hype meter. And I don't think I quite met that mark for me.
That's fascinating you say that too, because the Cinema Score came out, which Cinema Score is more audience scored. It's not critics. It's not. And actually, I didn't know that they did this until I started frequently going to the movies every week, and especially watching the latest blockbusters released in theaters. If you go to one on those days, I started realizing some studios give you like a tablet to give feedback directly to the studio. And I actually got to do it for Disclosure Day. And I was like, oh, this is, I've seen it a few times. The first time was surprising, but Cinema Score sometimes shows up and they give you like a little card and you tear down, like, I saw it for this movie and I give it an A or I give it a B- or whatever it is. And you get to be a part of the Cinema Score audience scoring, and Disclosure Day got a B. And so it's interesting to hear that you're like, I was expecting, a B+ and it didn't quite hit that. And I feel like a lot of people, it seems that way. But to your point too, like, it makes so much sense why some of these, it's probably easier for authors to use pen names than directors, but why, like, Stephen King writing as another name. I think it's Richard Bachman or something, but because of the expectations of the level of which, or the genre that you're staying in, Stephen King's writing all these like scary horror. So he writes under another name, and he can do like, I think The Longest Walk is one of them. That's one I'm familiar with, where it's still eerie and it's dystopian, but it's not quite like It horror. And I can see why they do that, because like, to your point, oh, Josh is directing this thing, they might have a different experience for it because they're not carrying all this weight into the movie. But like you, dude, I cannot tell you if I do not have a memory of watching E.T. start to finish. I do remember bits and pieces. I remember the something about it is the Reese's Pieces, and about how that changed like product placement in movies. And now like that was like a big shift in Hollywood and how they do that because of the increase in sales after that movie. And so I find all these fascinating things. And again, Spielberg being a part of shifting a whole industry, he's definitely a giant, right, in this world. So I think, like, just for me too, I grew up, my dad showing me like Saving Private Ryan, Hook, which the critics apparently hate. I loved Hook, but that's, I was a child when I watched Hook, and the make believe and Peter Pan, and it's Robin Williams and Rufio, like all of that stuff was like so childhood. So there's some nostalgia there, but it was Temple of Doom that gave me nightmares as far as the whole Indiana Jones world, when they put the hand and he pulls out the heart, that like messed me up more than I guess the face melting. Because when you mentioned it, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about there's face melting. But I have never forgotten a dude just pulling hearts out of people. That gave me a little bit of some nightmares and stuff. But yeah, it's so wild to see how far back he goes. Even just thinking about the whole, how Raiders of the Lost Ark came about, or the whole Indiana Jones character. I read at one point it was because the George Lucas and him released Star Wars and Close Encounters, which I never saw. They released them similar time, and George Lucas was convinced his movie was going to be a flop. He was convinced Star Wars wasn't going to make it, so they were like vacationing in Hawaii or something, and then they together came up with the Indiana Jones in the midst of feeling like their movies were not going to do anything. And then it turns out Close Encounters was not a flop. It was definitely, a movie, but Star Wars blew it out of the water by like miles and miles. And so it's funny to see how those things go. Cause yeah, Indiana Jones is such you just grew up watching it, even though, I probably exposed them a little later. Obviously I wasn't around in the 80s, but they're just fun. They're really fun. But let's transition into the disclosure day, because I know you mentioned it didn't quite hit where you thought it was going to be. It seems like you share a similar reaction. But yeah, what were some of your immediate reactions? We see this in theaters. Do you go to theaters like frequently? Like how is that routine in your life?
For a long time, the only movies I would see in the theater were like when the Star Wars sequel trilogy was coming out, and like Rogue One, and I just thought, I asked my wife if she would come with me, and she would say, okay. And now 2 things have happened. One, our son is old enough that he's really gotten into going to the movies. And so it's fun to go with him. We had a whole family going to see the more recent Lion King offering, and we went to see How to Train Your Dragon. And actually, earlier today, we were rewatching at home Jurassic World Rebirth, and I took him, my son, and his friend, and a friend's dad too. All 4 of us went about a year ago when Rebirth came out, and it's a beautiful thing to be in the theater with children, and you kind of see it through their eyes. And that was one thing that I really noticed about going to Disclosure Day, is there was a big age spread in the theater.
Okay.
One, the theater was more crowded than when I went to go see The Mandalorian and Grogu.
Oh, wow.
Weeks ago. And similar, like, my friend and I go to movies together. And so we always pick like a weekend matinee time. So we're not going to probably like the prime time, Saturday evening. And So for Disclosure Day, there were more people there. Still wasn't super crowded, but it was noticeably more full theater. And that we were sitting in a group of like, sort of 13, 14-year-old boys, and someone's dad had brought them. And then behind us, there were a bunch of folks who, needed help getting up the stairs, some of our elders who were out taking in the show. And I just loved that. I really do love being in mixed age spaces, because I think it's so easy for us to get segmented into we only hang out with people who are in the same stage of life as us. And it's not actually, I don't think of it as being very natural. So when the movie ended, so like I was standing up, I remember these teenage boys were like they were going off like, oh, that was so good. I loved it. That was really great. And they probably used some slang that I'm not familiar with. Not quite that age. But I was kind of like, oh, that was okay. I mean, it was a hot day, and the heat of the day, I was inside a dark air conditioned space. So I was comfortable, and it was entertaining. It was an entertaining film, but it didn't like hit me with anything close to the weight of like Sinners. Like when I went to see Sinners, the lights came on and I was like, oh my God, I just saw one of the best films that I've like ever seen,
Right.
And that was a little over a year ago that I saw that. And, I was also underwhelmed by The Mandalorian and Grogu, which we can talk about later if there's time. But it was interesting to look at who was in the theater with me. And I thought, those they happen to all be all boys. These teenage boys, they are at a great age where they haven't seen a lot of Spielberg movies.
Right.
They haven't, like I'm 45. Like I've seen a lot more movies than these teenagers have. And it made me ask the question of myself, like, God, these kids are so enchanted by it. And am I too like jaded to be enchanted by something and really taken away on that journey that movies give us, unless it's at a certain level, like with Sinners, which like so many of the scenes in Sinners, I was like, oh, I analyze this for like years, and it would be a really fun, enjoyable task. Or like with Dune, the Dune series, like I'm so excited for Dune Part 3 to come out in roughly 6 months. And even just going to movies earlier this summer and seeing the Dune Part 3 trailer, I'm like, well, I told my friend after The Mandalorian, I was like, oh, I think seeing the Dune 3 trailer again in the theater was probably worth the price of going to the movie.
Right.
And so I've kind of wondered, like, as we transition from one point of life or phase of life or season of life to another, what we're interested in is going to naturally shift, and our perception of things is going to naturally shift. And I don't think it's, better or worse, but it is really, really different. Like the next installment in the Monsterverse that's coming out, I think in about a year.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit less than a year. My son is already super excited about it. He and his friend are already like talking about things they have found on YouTube, people trying to do little like, speculations on the nature of how certain kaiju are going to be depicted. And they're so pumped for it. Now, when they watch those movies, my son and his friend, these two boys that are like late elementary school age, they just want to see kaiju ripping heads off each other. Like that's what they want. They're like, yada, yada, Gojira is here to protect us. And they're like, they're not buying the like ecological argument, that slice of the story. They're not interested in this sort of narrative that humans actually aren't the most powerful forces on this planet. Whereas for me, that's what draws me into the story.
Yeah.
And so I will say, going back to Disclosure Day, that was one part of it. This is the big question in the film, as you laid out. These people have proof that there are aliens amongst us, and that it's been hidden, right, from the general public for decades. And then do they release the information? Spoiler, They do.
They do.
They do. And that was kind of the question that Spielberg was asking us in the film was, can humanity handle the truth? You know? And I felt like if we went back to like A Few Good Men, it was like, you can't handle the truth. But I think it turned out that in this case, humanity, you know, the takeaway for me is that humanity could handle it. We didn't really, it ends with like disclosure, and we don't get to see like the next 5 minutes, let alone 5 years.
Yeah.
But, you know, this is part of what he was doing with this film, is sort of this setup of this kind of philosophical question. There are aliens, and it turns out it's not like Independence Day. They're not here to like annihilate us and colonize us. Spielberg isn't doing like a reverse colonization narrative that we could, you know, the framework for understanding these films and these stories where aliens come from outer space and, you know, treat predominantly white societies the way that some of those societies treated non-white societies during the age of European colonial expansion. But instead, it's like the aliens are here and they think empathy is really important. And I was like, oh, I also agree that empathy is really important. And we live in an era where empathy is, you know, not being given a lot of credit. And then we're surprised that things aren't going well.
Right.
For most people. So
yeah, no, that's great. And I think it is interesting. I went and watched Pressure, which is a World War II movie and with meteorologists. And I think I was the youngest person there. And there's definitely, you know, like a certain different, and I went on Memorial Day. So that was a big part of it too. It pre-released on a Monday. It was in the afternoon or something. And so to your point of like this movie drawing, because I went on a Thursday evening where it was opening, you know, weekend, and there was a lot of people. And I go to a lot of Thursday night movies, and I always think, oh, it's opening weekend, the theater's going to be packed. And sometimes it's like me and like 3 people, or me and like a handful. And so it was really cool to see, you know, like you're saying, the weight of Spielberg drawing these people in, but it's the Gen Z, which is ages like 14 to 29, they're the ones driving theater going right now, which, like, to your point about being enchanted by the movie theater, like this generation Z is really, they're really wanting this, whatever this is, or whatever that magical experience about experiencing these stories and the things they love on the screen. But yeah, I definitely felt like, you know, that immediately I thought about Arrival, because Arrival is a similar story about they're not here to destroy or colonize. They're not here to, you know, attack humanity. In fact, it's the opposite. They're here to give a gift. And so I immediately thought about that. But Spielberg just has a way of telling stories in a more blockbustery way. And maybe that's what it is. It's like this movie feels, and I don't always like throwing this word around because it feels pretentious, but the nuance, I think there's these nuanced way of telling stories, and Spielberg kind of sticks, it feels, to what he knows and what he does. But I mean, people were like, are people really excited about Spielberg movies? I was watching some podcasts and reading or listening to some podcasts about this, and some people are like, I don't think he has the draw. People don't want to show up to Spielberg. They want new and original. They want Sinners, because Sinners is like this profound, nuanced way of making films, even using the different aspect ratios for different scenes to communicate something. I thought was so extremely well done. And in Sweet and Condensed, when some of our episodes we talk about think, laugh, cry. Does it hold you in thought? Does it make you laugh? Does it make you cry? If so, it's a full movie. Sinners is that. It was so intense. This, like, yeah, it held me in thought more than anything. I had a few chuckles, you know, but I can see how people got emotional. I read a bunch of stuff about the third act, which we'll get to, but it just didn't trigger that heavy emotions for me. It held me in thought more than anything. But to what I was saying earlier about like what's it called? People showing up. Arrival got $200 million worldwide. That was their gross, right? And opening week was $24 million. Spielberg did $100 million. It was like 90-something million opening weekend on Disclosure Day, which I was like, oh, people are showing up for Spielberg. This is, you know, it's a $115 million budget. It's his return to sci-fi, right? Return to aliens. I know early on with Close Encounters and E.T., he was engrossed by aliens, and then he started doing things like Saving Private Ryan, Hook, Catch Me If You Can, The Terminal, these other types of stories, which they all have a special place in my heart, all those movies, right? But he's returning to this extraterrestrial, alien, human, relational stuff. And so, which is really fun, I think, in so many ways, just because I do like this. I like the idea that, the other, the alien, they're not here to hurt, they're here to help, kind of concept, right? And so what did you feel about Spielberg and the way he tells stories? How was the pacing or the structure of the story for you? Did you find that it was dragging at times, or were you like engrossed the whole time?
There were times where I felt things were either going too fast or too slow.
Oh, okay.
There were also parts where things that were happening on screen, like the alien stuff, was more believable, but certain things in some of the action scenes, I was like, well, maybe I've been watching too many action movies, but I don't see how this guy is sneaking up on a bunch of,
right.
extra governmental agents, and he's hiding behind a picket fence. And I was like, it's an open picket fence. It's not that hard to see. I was like, you're right there, and you're not like cloaked or something. You're just crouched down. That part was a little tricky for me. Yeah, I again, like I said, I enjoyed it. I think I don't come to movies with the same type of technical eye that you do in terms of analyzing things like the aspect ratios.
Yeah.
I think that's something I should learn more about, because obviously, and I do this when I've taught courses like my Islam and film class that I've done for years, or used to do for years, is to tell the students, look, every single thing you see on the screen has been put into the frame by other human beings.
Yeah.
You're right. Every single thing, even if it's AI generated,
right?
A human said, hey, AI, can you please create this? Or probably didn't use please.
There's right. There's fingerprints of humans on everything.
That's right. So which is wonderful, because it means that every single thing is up for analysis and critique, which is what I, really, really enjoy. And I feel like in this one, I really enjoyed Emily Blunt's performance. I'd love to hear someone who's from Kansas City critique her accent.
Yeah.
I thought it was, believable. And I thought, just one little point to talk about in terms of the aliens being benevolent. There is an important point here, which is, so what is disclosed to us in the lead up to when the presence of aliens is disclosed to people in the film, is that these two children, when they're approximately 10 years old, are abducted and like physically, biologically altered by the aliens, which when you stop and think about it, I'm like, whoa, that is really awful and scary.
Right.
And, we can question the moral choices. Like the aliens could have gone to adults and said, hey, red pill, blue pill, or something like that. There could have been like a moment of where the adult could give consent. Oh, you're going to alter me so that I have this like supreme understanding of mathematics, or you're going to alter me so that I can I have like this ultimate empathy power, so I can look you in the eye and know everything that you're thinking.
Right.
I also thought it was a bit too, I didn't like that the woman had the high empathy skill. And of course, like the man was the ultimate math master.
Right.
So I felt like Spielberg was sort of playing too much into these all too common gender tropes. And I was actually contrasting that with, like I said, I was rewatching Jurassic Park Rebirth with my son and my wife this morning. And in that film, having Scarlett Johansson be like the commando, right? The like special forces sort of like expert. And the paleontologist is like, well, I think I should take the shot to get the sample from the mosasaur. And she's like, are you sure you want to be the one to take the shot? And then he's like, oh yeah, no, I don't really know what I'm doing, and this is scary, and you're the professional. You're the one who's competent and who's expert at these tasks. Like that disrupted the sort of gender stereotypes that, that I grew up with, seeing all the time.
Right.
So I think it's such an easy thing to do. Like in this case, this is a good example of like, why couldn't the female, if you had to have a male and female sort of like pairing for the main characters, which, okay, fine. Why does the man have to be better at math and the woman be the one who's like, I can feel everything you've gone through?
Right.
So I thought that was disappointing because it was predictable. And again, that was a choice.
Right.
They could change the characters and it would have been fine. But even like Emily Blunt's character, she has this massive panic attack in the film. And it's very understandable because they almost die.
The train, right? The train sequence. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, so you were almost run over by a train because this evil government agent guy was like driving into he had his car and he was pushing your car onto the tracks and, you jump and you barely survive. And she has a panic attack. I was like, well, I have no issue with her having a panic attack, but even just having like the woman be the one who has the panic attack and the man being the one who's like, I'm here for you. Like, focus on your breath. I'll calm you down. Even just that, I was like, I didn't really understand what I was supposed to get out of that, except that, she's somehow fragile and more needy than he is.
Right.
And that was disappointing.
Right. And they probably chalked it up to like, which I know he's like works for this dark private corporation that works with the government and all that, but he also wasn't a field agent, like he was a hacker. So to your point about playing into tropes, that's a really great point. And I mean, and we've seen this in movies that they do it really well, like very similar to the Jurassic Park was like, I thought about Furiosa, the first one, actually, Mad Max Fury Road, the one in 2016 or so with Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron. There's a scene where he's shooting the rifle and he keeps missing. And then he hands it over to her and she shoots one time and nails it. And again, it's breaking that competency between, it's weapons in action and it's that's a man's thing or what. And to your point, like, I didn't even think about that. It's like, yeah, you could have easily switched them. And it's not like Josh O'Connor. You can keep the same casting. Emily Blunt has played some very well, like action and tough and brutal characters. And Josh O'Connor's he a lot of his early stuff, and even in the last decade, he plays queer roles. Like and not that queerness means femininity, but he does have this emotional capacity to, I don't know, he has this tenderness, this softness that I just really love that I wish portrayed more in men on the screen. And I think the casting here alone, it really held me in more in the movie. I think if they had casted anyone else, I don't know. I think it might have came across even more corny or even more heavy-handed, but because of their abilities, and Emily Blunt's performance was, I think, phenomenal. I like Josh O'Connor. It is interesting to see how, like, it's like, the man gets the IQ gift and you get the EQ gift. And to say too, like the trauma that these 10-year-olds got, both of them were like, I can't remember before I was 10. And I was like, like to your point about like these benevolent aliens, even, and of course they're going to play it to create tension, but like it was both beautifully shot. The whole movie was beautifully shot, I thought. I did appreciate, I started seeing some of the lens flares, and which I'm like, that's cool. Like, you're using certain lenses, and I think they're anamorphic is what I would imagine they are. And the score was fine. I think it was probably great, but for me, that's the hard part for me, is to really, really pay attention to a score unless it really grips me. Like Challengers, which is another movie, Josh O'Connor, the score was so sick. And so it was like a character in the movie. But with this, I was so just more focused on like the actors and the performances and what was going in the story versus the sound. But the way that it was shot when they were receiving the gift with the alien's hands creeping on the face, really great. Mm-hmm. But to your point, like that's horrifying for a 10. And then there's these two kids that don't even know each other. And then they're finding, they reach out and they hold hands, and which is really touching and great, like these strangers. And I think that theme was, for me, pretty well done, of like the other, whether it was strangers comforting each other, these two kids who don't know each other comforting each other. Something I thought was really, well done in terms of what I was held in thought was when the animals, came up, and I think it was Coleman Domingo's character who was saying, "Don't worry, it's them," but they're approaching us in a way that's that's different animals, but we're more familiar with foxes. We're more familiar with deer. And it made me think about that concept of how many times does the other have to perform in order to even be able to help or contribute their gifts to society, because we have these expectations, for example, like what we're talking about, these expectations, or these standardizations of what it means to be male and female and to offer gifts. Like, oh, the woman is going to be more empathy, high EQ. The man's going to be high IQ. But what if it was reversed? What is the performance you have to do in order to get in that room, right? Because a woman being a leader and being brave and bold sometimes comes across as, oh, you're I don't know, part of my language, but sometimes when people are high-powered and very leader-driven women, people are like, oh, they're being a bitch, which is so derogatory in so many different ways, versus when a man's that way, they're like, oh, that's just being a man. Like, that's how you lead. You can be offensive. And so the way that they showed the aliens as animals just so they can be approachable by humans, it made me think about that, right? It made me think about code switching. It made me think about masking, performance. What do people have to do who aren't a part of dominant cultures? How do they need to change themselves in order to be seen, or in order to be heard, or in order to provide gifts for people? So I thought that was cool, even as much as it did seem kind of like the first time he saw the deer, he was like, they're looking at me and they run away when I pull out a can. But because it was Josh O'Connor, I was like, oh, okay, you're delivering this well. But I could have easily seen it being like, oh, this is so corny or cheesy or whatever, what have you. So, which is a great way to just continue the conversation about, the performance of the characters, or even that last 20 minutes, I guess, or the last 30 minutes, the finale. How did that land for you? Like, we did talk, like, to even expound further about benevolence, or to expand further upon the gift. The ending of the movie, did it land for you in terms of what he was trying to say about empathy and listening and the other? How did you feel about that message towards the end and how the characters perform those roles?
So I think in the build up to that last, sort of 20 minutes, it's probably worth going back and talking about the Jane character.
Yeah.
She's the girlfriend, and we find out the former nun of the hacker, or she's former nun and then current girlfriend of the hacker. And we don't really know anything else, I don't think, about her. But so she, of course, finds out from him that, oh, there are aliens. And then she's like, oh, you can't tell people this. Like, people need to believe in God. And if we find out that we're not the only creation, like the only sort of supreme being, or sort of not, second to God, then our sense of self will collapse, and, the center will not hold. And then I love this sister Mora, I think is her name, sort of the nun at the convent.
Yeah.
So Jane calls her and says, well, what would you, I'm paraphrasing here, but basically, like, how would you feel if you found out that we weren't the only sort of sentient life forms, on the planet or in the universe? And Sister Mora is like, oh, well, that would make a lot of sense. And then Jane's like, well, but what about this line from Genesis about being, sort of the greatest, of all creatures? And then Sister Mora says, on earth. And Jane is like, what? And Sister Mora is like, on earth. Like, child, if you just read the rest of the sentence and think about it, then you're okay. And this is something that in Muslim communities people talk about a lot, that in the first surah or chapter of the Quran, we get this phrase where God is referred to as Rabb al-Alameen, meaning Lord of the world, right? And so this idea then is embedded here in the very first chapter of the Quran, the very first few lines, that God is not just the Lord of this world, but there are others. And so then it stands to reckon that, there's other creatures that over which, God is Lord. And of course, we critique the sort of hierarchical power structure of many religious traditions, especially in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But in this film, I love a little commentary on like, maybe you need to go do more homework than just watching the TikTok reel version of Genesis. Maybe you need to read just a few more words.
Yeah.
Just the end of the verse and then think about it. And I loved that little dig at like, what a sad view of humanity and our capacity for growth to think that we would all fall apart upon learning that there are aliens and that there have been aliens and that there are going to continue being aliens.
Right.
And sure, we have lots of questions. That's like natural, but that we can handle it. And I feel like at the end, you know, what's sort of interesting is that the Colin Firth character, who is kind of the principal villain, he kind of just gives up.
Right.
And I think I've been watching too much, I don't know, contemporary sort of action sort of shows. But I was like, when are the Ward X agents just going to start executing some of our beloved characters? I was like, they have guns.
Right.
They're not afraid to use them. And that part of it, I was like, oh, well, this is to keep it, you know, it's not an R-rated movie.
Yeah.
So like expectations are set appropriately. But I was surprised at that because like so Colin Firth has this sort of lieutenant, if you will, is the one that tries to push our two main characters, you know, and in their car, like push their car onto the train tracks. And so you think that he's the one who's going to be like, well, I'm just going to shut this down before they disclose all this information to the public. And instead, he says to the Colin Firth character, he says, well, aren't you going to do anything? And the Colin Firth character has literally sat down.
You know, rolly chair.
Yeah, like, okay, this has been my life's work, protecting humanity from this secret that I think will destroy them. Okay, I'm just going to let it play out. And so that part of it for me, and then the second lieutenant or the lieutenant, you know, shrugs his shoulders and then sort of says to the other members of the goon squad, like, okay, gang, like we're out of here. Like we're headed to the diner. And that part of it, like, took me out of the story a bit because I just felt like if you were going to go through that rigmarole of having this attempt at the disclosure and then have the bad guys show up and be physically present with guns, I didn't see how, and especially because we're in America, they weren't going to deploy like lethal levels of violence and start shooting people. And I was like, man, what are they going to do? Are they going to like napalm this news station in the middle of Kansas City? I was like, these are things that in a lot of movies we see government agencies, or in this case, an extra governmental kind of corporate, it's a private public partnership.
Right.
we see them do. Are they going to whip out something like the Men in Black movies, like the flashy thing, and be like, everyone, look here, there has been a gas leak. No, it's just like, oh, now it's just out. This information is out. I would have been curious. Like I walked out thinking, okay, so in this movie, this thing just happened. Humanity's sense of itself is forever altered. What does Spielberg think would happen next? And you know, it's, you know, he didn't have another hour of time to work with. Movie's already over 2 hours long. So, you know, it made sense that it ended where it did, but I was kind of curious. I was like, oh, well, I wonder what he imagines would happen.
Right.
I mean, is it like something like with Project Hail Mary, you know, or very positive depiction of sort of human alien like relations? I mean, really super endearing.
Right.
Or is it, I don't know. It's I mean, this is something we see if you dig enough in like the Star Trek universe, where like in the Enterprise series, which I know is before your time, Josh, but you know, we explore this early period in the Star Trek timeline where humanity has developed warp drive. Humanity makes contact with the Vulcans. Humanity starts to expand its just exploratory efforts beyond its solar system. And we run into, there's all these different races, these species out there. Some of them are great to work with, some of them not so much. But there's forces on Earth that are very much like Earth first, aliens out. We're afraid of difference. And it's interesting how I feel like Spielberg's vision in this film is ultimately, it seemed very optimistic.
Right.
That's how I left the theater. Like, oh, I feel like this is trending in a maybe not utopian, but not dystopian
Yeah.
sort of end game.
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. Cause it's even what would make 8 billion people stand still and be locked into one thing. Right. And so it has, I felt the same way. It's like, there has to be a positive thing. And then also the fact that they wheeled out this, like what seemed like an elder alien, it made me realize, oh, they've had a relationship. Like I was curious about where were they hiding this alien and what was that relation? Was this alien willing? Like it sounds like did they escaped was it called rescued, or they helped the alien escape from, because they talked about like, oh, you must have been the person that took that. They had a word for it. They dehumanized the alien, or personhood the alien.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then later at the end I was like, that's what they were talking about, that Coleman Domingo's character stole. Right. And so the thing too about, I think it's a double-edged sword for me that I appreciate about Spielberg and people who make movies. Like I felt like this was a movie. Like there needs to be a suspension of belief in order to, like the whole scene about hiding behind the picket fence. I'm like, well, it's a movie, right? I was like, yeah, of course the car's unlocked. Of course they didn't hear him. And so when that starts to happen, I'm like, all right, I got to just jump in this car and go for this ride. Like, because there's going to be these elements of like, even why was that window open, and the cardinal flew through, and, why is there, I don't know. Anyways, there's just little elements of course the window's open at that time. And of course the thing flew out. And of course, they're going to make it from this train thing, and how are they going to jump across? I don't know. And of course there's another train coming down at the same time. And so there's this element of movie making, or feeling like, oh yeah, this is a movie. Like, and at the end, it was very unbelievable to me in this day and age of where we live today with disinformation, misinformation, fake news, and government, what's it called, intervention. Like, because I was like, yeah, at the end, why didn't you use tasers, smoke grenades, or start arresting people, And of course, I think what they were trying to communicate, well, at least from my thought, was like he was transformed by this gift, right? Because he's like, I saw my wife, and he let them go, and that's what led them to getting, attacked by the train, is because the Colin Firth, the main antagonist, was like, just let him walk. And part of me is like, really? Just, you see all these people, you're just going to let them walk? And then he still chases them. And then at the end, of course, he sits down and gives up. And there was a part of me, it's like, are you trying to communicate that even these folks who are trying to suppress information, they're curious? There's something, it's like, oh, he's like, well, you know what? Let's see what's going to happen. I tried. I blew up the backup generator. I blew up the electricity. That's all I got. But in reality, like you're saying, it's like, no, you start shooting people. You start coming up with some story. You start arresting folks. Because there was a part of me, it's like, that's what stopped you? Just go arrest them. Yeah. Like, stop them from doing this. But again, I think it was that element, trying to, and so I'm not really sure how that necessarily landed on me. But at the same time, once I started realizing, oh, Spielberg's making a Spielberg movie and it's big, and I'm going to have to suspend some stuff, and that's going to impact part of my watch. And I thought it was a great movie. I'm like, yeah, cool. This is fun. This is great. I didn't know if I expected profoundness. And the last 30 minutes for me was way more emotional. Like I was like, hell yeah, this is, I'm a very empathetic person. So I'm just like, yeah, this is cool. And like this winning, this idea of like, just sit down and listen, or to your point of like, keep reading. Oh, that's something I want to ask too. I was not expecting religious tones like at all. So when I first heard that, I was like, not thrown off in like, that's bad. But it definitely was like, oh, this is going to change how people receive this. So I was just curious, did you expect the religious tones? Did you expect that? And also, how did that impact the movie watching? Like, I just feel like it'd be a shame not to talk about religion.
Of course. I did not expect that going in. I was like, oh, what's this? Because honestly, a lot of these types of movies, or, oh, the aliens are showing up, there's not a lot necessarily about religion. But the thing that I thought was a little bit weird is, of all the people to sort of focus on as the embodiment of, oh, this character, right? Because each character is doing work and they're standing in for, a certain segment of whatever the community is they represent. And so in this case, the Jane character represents like religious people. But the fact that she's a former nun, or she was a novice, which is sort of like early on in the process of becoming a nun. And there was never anyone who was like, well, I wonder what a lot of Hindus would think about this, or Buddhists. Well, you know what I mean? Or I felt like it was so Christian centered it wasn't just having the character be a former Catholic nun who expressed like, oh, I didn't lose my faith in God. And the Sister Mora character is like, well, I think you just lost your faith in humanity, which I'm like, if you're paying attention to humanity, that is a totally defensible take.
Right.
So, but that part of it kind of bothered me, because I just thought, you're talking about how 8 billion people are going to deal with this information, and you're bringing in religious identity and this like sense of self that, sort of sociologists and psychologists, people who take that approach to the study of religion, would argue that this is a big part of what religion does, like functionally in a society, is it gives us a sort of structure through which we view ultimate reality, and our view of ultimate reality helps us understand how we fit into the mundane sort of, day-to-day stuff of our much less ultimate reality. And I just felt like there wasn't enough done to like talk about other perspectives. So it was one of those things where I was like, either bring it in and do it right and do it well, or just leave it out. Like there was nothing, it didn't add anything for me, having the discussion of religion. Like I really didn't feel like that piece of it added much to the experience. Maybe other people feel differently. I mean, I'm sure other people do, but for me, I just thought it was like if you're going to open a can of worms, I want to see all the worms. Instead, it was like a little sneak peek. It was like when you have a thing of Pringles and you open it just like enough that you get the smell of the ultra processed goodies that are inside, but you're not actually getting to bite in on one.
Right.
And that's how I felt about how they handled religion in this film.
Yeah. And I think it was interesting, we have a Jewish director making this film, and I had whiplash, like when the heavy religious tones, I was like, oh, I just didn't expect that. And then they chose Catholicism. And then when I left the theater, and you have to answer this anonymous survey, right? And you're clicking things. And one of the questions was about identifying, and usually it's the same stuff, right? Or it's like, where are you politically? Are you moderate, progressive, conservative? Are you a registered independent Republican? Stuff like that, registered Democrat. But one of the questions was, are you evangelical Christian? And there was no other denomination, there was no other religions. And so it made me think, oh, is this a movie that is being made because of the current state? Again, like centralizing humans and centralizing America, and then centralizing what is going on in America with, there's a lot of conversation around Christian nationalism, white Christian nationalism. We have, the current administration and the attack on all of these different demographics of people. But like to your point, it's very Christian centric in the dialogue right now, but also this movie. And I just thought it was fascinating because, like, to your point, talking about the Quran, which I'm not familiar with, saying like, oh, there is this word, there's a whole sentence talking about God is the God of worlds. Like, I'm like, oh, to your point, like if you get these other perspectives, you have these things that address the things they're wrestling with in this film. Sure. And maybe it's because, in a movie, they have to pick a lane, they have to tell a story, and they're like, oh, if there's a lane that says, oh, he's the God of world, boom, now we don't have a story or whatever, right? And so, but to your point, that is a very like American United States thing is to let's dismiss not just like what's it called, like multi-deists. I forget what you'd call that, like polytheistic religions. Yeah. Let's dismiss pluralism, and then let's just, and it's not even monotheism, because to your point, there's no Islamic perspective at all. It's like Christian. I'm curious if you think that this movie was timely, or is this like, oh, I don't want to make a movie about aliens, or if there was a more commentary addressing like the current state, the culture, society that is going on in the United States, even though this movie's, I'm pretty sure, like making great money worldwide, right? So
I'm sure it is raking in money. I mean, just it's one of the, like we said, one of the biggest names in Hollywood, and coming out with this sort of big, like, oh, it's about humans and aliens, right? So it's going to draw people in. I'm curious. I just want to go back and ask a clarifying question about the survey you took. So you were asked if, in terms of like identifying yourself, and there was a series of questions, and one of them was about your religious affiliation. And so what were all of the options on that at that point in the survey?
Yeah. So it wasn't a specific section for religion affiliation. Evangelical Christianity was thrown in the mix of other ones. So it wasn't just a religious, it was like political, evangelical Christianity, and then a couple other ones. Because then before that, it was like sexuality and race and some other things. But then each page, you go to the next page and then you answer something next page. I just thought it was so odd that like there was one page that had all of these different identifiers, and then there was evangelical Christianity. It wasn't a dedicated religion page with all these different religions. So I don't know. Did that answer the question? Like, yeah, they gave.
So you weren't given the option to say like, I'm Catholic or I'm Protestant. No, it was just, are you evangelical Christian or not?
Specifically evangelical. It didn't say Christian. It said evangelical Christian.
So what's so curious about that is that's not a denomination that's really directly referenced in the film.
Right.
So there's an interesting way here in which Catholicism is used in the film as sort of a stand-in, number one, for all of Christianity, which it's not. I mean, it's the single largest denomination globally, but there's tons of denominations of Christianity, including especially Orthodox Christians that here in the U.S. we tend to like be totally ignorant of. And then it's also used as a sort of stand-in for all of these different religious identities, which is what I talked about earlier. And I think it's just kind of weird. And this presence of this question on the survey that you took is really fascinating, because it's not like if we go back, now to, 20 some years ago with Mel Gibson's movie Passion of the Christ, when that came out, and I was doing my master's at a divinity school. So there were a lot of people I was studying with who their track was to go on and become ordained in various religious, denominations, both Jewish and Christian, and a whole slew of others. And so one of the things that we talked about watching that film was whether or not that film was going to resonate outside of sort of kind of older school Catholic audience numbers, and specifically talking about, well, what were Pentecostal Christian, what were evangelical Christians going to think about it, because it's a theology that was very different what was depicted on screen than how scholars were representing like those two denominations. And survey said that there were lots of people who loved that film. I am not one of those people, but I sort of went because I was in divinity school, and I knew that when I went to my family reunion that summer, that everyone was going to be like, well, Patrick, what do you think about Passion of the Christ?
Right.
I was going to be like, oh, I didn't know we were going to take Passion narrative from this Belgian nun from, I think, the 17th or 18th century, and then use that as the inspiration to the whole scourging of Christ. That's one of the most graphic sort of violent scenes in the whole film. But that aside, it's kind of interesting that, like, why not? If that question is going to be on the survey, why isn't there an evangelical Christian? Like, why isn't Jane an evangelical Christian?
Right.
If Jane's role in the film is to represent like religious people, then I would be really intrigued by what the people who formulated the survey would have to say about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I was curious if they were, because it allegedly all this stuff goes straight to the studio. So I was like, are they just curious if evangelicals liked it or not, or why they went to see it, or why? And it's like, are they doing a case study specifically? Because yeah, to your, it was very, and to your point about the conversation between Catholics and Christians, like I've been doing a lot of work this last year with multiple belongings and different faith traditions, and there's folks who are like, and just even not just even this past year, just even when I used to be involved with a nonprofit that was Christian and evangelical Christian specifically and went to non-denominational churches, some folks were like, no, Catholics aren't Christians. And there were Catholics who were saying we are Christians. And then I've recently was talking to someone who is Jewish, and they were like, when I think of Christians, my thought immediately goes to Catholicism, to Catholics. And so I'm like, oh, there's such a, like, to your point, if you just hang out, like when you're saying going to the theaters and you're watching with one generation, or you're watching with just one group of people, I didn't realize, like, there's this view that is so different. Like, no, Catholics are Christians. No, Catholics aren't Christians. Folks say, no, Catholics are what I think is the default Christian is Catholics. And so it is I think, to me, it was signifying that the studios were very, very interested in the reception of this movie by evangelicals, not necessarily saying which type of religious affiliations are people going to the movies. And so maybe that's why they shaped the survey that way. But yeah, I'm always fascinated by these surveys because, yeah, they ask a lot of questions. And it's funny because I'll oftentimes like, why did you watch this movie? And often I want to say, well, because I run a newsletter and I have to. But, okay.
It's work. I had to go to work.
Right. I'm at the office. What do you mean? Because there's movies that I've watched that I'm like, I have no interest in this, but it's the biggest movie, so I got to go. But then there's times like this where I'm like, oh, Emily Blunt and Josh O'Connor in it. And it's obvious. And honestly, like, not that I'm like a Spielberg head, but I mean, I watched Jaws for the first time ever in theaters for the 50th anniversary last year. Eric always gives me a hard time. He says I'm ageist against films because if it's before 1990, he's like, you haven't seen it. So I'm slowly making my rounds. But to my point, if I was a real Spielberg head, I would have watched, Close Encounters, which I haven't. I would watch the, E.T. start to finish again because I don't remember. So, but it's Spielberg, so I'm going to go see it. I wasn't the... People lost their mind over The Fableman, and I thought it was fine. It was good, but it was not, again, it was because of work. It wasn't because I was like, oh, I want to be first in line, like Dune. I was like, screw the newsletter. I'm not doing this no, I'm doing it for the people, but I'm doing it for me, and because I'm a big fan of everyone in that production, right? And so, and so anyways, yeah, it is a curious, I appreciate your questions about that, because it is a curious thing. The last thing I want to say before we end, our last question, it can be really quick too, something I thought about post, I wasn't thinking about then. I thought it was interesting that the protagonists, Josh O'Connor and Emily Blunt's character, were people who would either decode, they were hackers in decoding stuff that was unknown, and then you have a meteorologist who predicted unpredictable things like weather. And they did have little nods in that where it's like, she's like, there's going to be hail. And then there was like clear skies and there was no hail. And then it came later than they thought. So I was just curious, do you think how that played into this messaging about patterns and leaning into the unknown, or trying to find certainty in an uncertain world? And what is that? Is this a human thing? Is this like, is it just because we're afraid? Like, because for me, I'm not big on certainty. I see certainty and people are like, no, I know this is true for a fact. I get skeptical and weary because I'm like, and maybe I'm a little biased too, because I heard an interview with Guillermo del Toro, which is another person I really like. And especially, he's a pretty profound Mexican filmmaker. So there's some kindredness there. But he said, when I hear certainty, he goes, I tell people run for the hills. When people say this is certain, I'm going the opposite direction. And so I like, oh yeah, I feel that. So I'm just curious if you had any thoughts about that, of like these two specific, like you were saying, there's fingerprints on everything. They chose weather on purpose. They chose a hacker on purpose. So I'm just curious if you thought about that during the watch or reflecting on it, or is this the first time you're even thinking about protagonists as people who can recognize or looking for patterns that are in a chaotic world that we currently live in?
Well, I think again, if I could link back to my earlier critique of the sort of gender norms that are reinforced, it's like not only can Josh O'Connor do all this, he's really good at math, right? As an understatement, but it's like his ability, because the Hugo character says, oh, mathematics is the universal language of the universe. And so it's like, oh, so he can like understand the universe. But then Emily Blunt's empathy extends then to the natural world, which is in many cases presented as feminine. So it's like, not only can she look you in the eye and tell you, like she does with one of her coworkers at the news station, like, oh, you need to get away from this abusive relationship, which later on the woman's like, oh, thank you for telling me that. Like my kid and I are safe now. But also she's like, it's going to hail. I can feel it like in my bones. And I have this, sort of stereotypical feminine intuition about the nature or the sort of the vibe of the natural world, and so there is both cases, the ways in which they read patterns that are opaque to the rest of us, then those ways map again onto these sort of gender norms, which, like I am critical of, but other people aren't going to question it at all.
Yeah.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Alrighty. And to close out too, is this rewatchable for you? Will you be watching this again? Is this necessary to watch on the big screen, or is this a wait till, streaming?
I enjoyed it on the big screen, but I easily could have seen it on my iPad at home, and it would have been it would have been fine. I don't think I need to go back and re-watch it unless someone brings something to my attention, that I'm like, oh, you need to go back and look at this one scene and you understand it, at a more intimate level. But no, I don't think I would feel the need to rewatch it myself. I'm not going to if someone I'm hanging out with in the future says, oh, I want to watch that Spielberg alien movie called Disclosure Day. I'm not going to be against it. I don't have like a strong dislike of it by any means. Like I said, it was entertaining. I enjoyed it. It was, the ultimate test sometimes is you spend your time and your money going to do these things, and do you feel like it's what you get out of it is worth what you invest? And in this case, I would say yes. My friend and I, we go to movies on a pretty regular basis, and it's fun to hang out, and we go out to get food afterwards and talk about it. And yeah, that was fun. So
love it. Yeah. Cause I'm always saying too, like, which is kind of a contradiction to our newsletter. I'm like, every movie should be watched in the theaters. That's how it is. But there is that caveat though, which is why the newsletter exists. We have limited time and resources, like you said, and to invest that into something, some of us have families, some of us have different responsibilities, and we can't just be, spending, this is 2 hours and 25 minutes. I think there was like almost 40 minutes of trailers. It felt longer than normal. So I'm like, you're spending a good, over 3 hours in a theater. So yeah, is it worth your time? Your very finite resource, and then your money, that how we operate in this world, is it worth it? So but I agree with you that I wouldn't be upset, if I went to a matinee and spent some dollars on this, because, I'm not an AMC. This is not sponsored or anything, but AMC A-lister where I can watch 4 movies a week. So, I think it's about $28. It's moving up to 29 or something here soon. But still, I'm like, that's worth it, because I watched this in Dolby, and I think it would have costed me $23 just for one movie. So there's a part of me that's like, Josh, you're not really investing money, especially because, shout out Veronica, my mother's paying for it. But if I did pay, I would like, oh yeah, a matinee, I spend like $15, go to this thing, have a good conversation with a friend. I think it's worth it. So that being said, we are going to sign off now. There's going to be in the show notes everything that Patrick had mentioned earlier about what he's been up to. I want to plug that into the show notes there. And then, yeah, dude, Dune 3, we're gonna be covering that, right? Like, that's a movie that I will be watching multiple times in theaters. I don't think I'll go back and watch Disclosure Day in theaters, but I'll probably watch it, Dune 3, at least 2 times, 3 times. Who knows?
Well, my friend and I, we've already committed to going to find it in IMAX.
Love it.
Which we have not made that decision for any other films that we have seen in the last few years. So for us, it's a leveling up of commitment And yeah, I'm really excited. I have questions about how much of Children of Dune is going to get worked into Dune 3. Children of Dune is the third novel. Dune Part 1 and Dune Part 2 encompass the first novel called Dune. And then the second novel is Dune Messiah. And so Dune Part 3 by Denis Villeneuve will certainly cover all of the second book, Dune Messiah. And the question that I haven't gotten any clarity on, really, even trolling the internet, is how much, if any, of Children of Dune will be worked in. So it will be just the second time that we will get to see a screen adaptation. And it's the first time we'll see a big screen adaptation of material that goes beyond the initial Dune book.
Wow.
From the sci-fi series that came out. Children of Dune is what it was called. It's somewhat of a misnomer because it encompasses Dune Messiah and Children of Dune. But the Sci-Fi Channel put that out, I think, in 2003 as a follow-up to their award-winning adaptation from, I think, 2000 or 2001. So anyway, that's a lot to say. Yeah, I'm getting ready for Dune. And I think that's also just, it's a different scale.
It is.
Of a film. And it's one that I do think will be worth seeing on the big screen.
Agreed. Yeah, I'll be doing my due diligence and reading Children of Men this summer. Or Dune, Children of Men. I always say that. Great movie, but I always say Children of Dune this summer. So looking forward to that. Looking forward to chatting again, whether it's before Dune or for Dune. So subscribe to the newsletter, sweetandcondensed.com. Subscribe to World Beyond Worlds. That's Patrick's Substack as well. Podcast, interviews, essays. Let's see, shout out the Harrisons. They're watching Toy Story 5 tonight. So they gave me a little break. Not that I don't want to see it, but like and subscribe to all the things. Follow us on all the places you get podcasts. And till then, we will see you, or you'll hear from us next time. And again, Patrick, thank you for being on.
Oh, thanks again. It's a pleasure. Happy to be here.